Thanks, Dave. Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for our special council meeting on March the 17th. Earlier this evening, we opened the meeting for council to discuss a non-planning matter, and now we are at the public planning portion of our meeting. So we'll get started, and I would like to advise you that this meeting is audio and video recorded, live streamed, and shall form part of the public record, which will be retained according to the town's retention bylaw. For more information about the collection, please contact the clerk's office. And for any speakers tonight, please remember to mute your audio when you are not speaking. Tonight, we will have one item on the agenda for information and public consultation purposes. No decisions will be made this evening. We will hear from town staff concerning proposed amendments to the town's comprehensive zoning bylaw, bylaw number 080-13 regarding accessory third dwelling units. After they have spoken, council may have a few questions or provide comment, and then we will have an opportunity for public consultation where members of the public who have been pre-registered will be identified on the speakers list. And when it's your turn, I will ask you to turn on your video and your audio, and you'll have 5 minutes to ask your questions or express your concerns or suggestions. And then town staff will respond where possible. Should anyone need to speak for a second time to identify an issue that has not already been raised or to receive clarification, they may be provided another 5 minutes. Should any member of the public watching the live streaming wish to make comment during the meeting, they can email or call clerk's services, where the deputy clerk will be monitoring for input and will provide your comments to council and town staff during the meeting. Any comments received will become part of the public record. If you do not submit your comments during this meeting, you can still send them in and they will be provided to council and town staff, and you will also be added to the circulation list as an interested party, where you will be kept updated on any future information regarding this item. So the email and the phone number will be listed on the PowerPoint during the meeting and is also available on tonight's agenda that is found on the website. So please feel free to chime in at any point and give us your opinion. Now, we'll hear from the town clerk, Mr. Parkin, on how the public notice of this meeting was provided.
Thank you, Your Worship. Notice for this public meeting was circulated in the newspaper on February 18th and March 4th, 2021, and circulated 20 days prior to this public meeting to all required agencies. Notice was also put on the town's website and on the town's Get Involved Innisfil.ca website for review and commenting. Information on the proposed zoning bylaw amendments was also posted on the town's, it was also posted on the Get Involved.
Thank you. Has any correspondence been received by the clerk's department concerning the proposed amendments?
Yes, we've received one piece of correspondence from Contact Community Services, who are in support of the proposed amendments for the reason that third dwelling units would increase the housing stock within Innisfil and help address the community's needs for more affordable housing. And just a quick reminder for members of the public that they can provide comment or register their interest regarding this application during the meeting or up until council makes a decision by contacting the clerk's office. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. And I believe all of council was circulated with that letter from Contact. So we'll now hear from Paul Pentikainen. He's a policy planner here at the town of Innisfil, and he'll provide us a high-level summary of the planning context of the proposed amendments. And after his presentation, well, we'll have his presentation first. Mr. Pentikainen.
Hey, well, thank you, Mayor Dolan, and good evening, council, staff, residents, and everyone listening in this evening. Thank you for taking the time to attend wherever you may be virtually. Next slide, please. So the purpose of this presentation is to provide a general overview of the draft amendments to allow up to 2 accessory dwellings on properties in Innisfil, and then to receive input and answer any questions. As defined on this slide, an accessory dwelling, it's a self-contained dwelling unit that has its own kitchen, bathroom, sleeping facilities that are separate from the main house on the property. They can be within the main house or in an attached or detached structure. Now, since 2014, the town has already allowed up to 1 accessory dwelling or a second dwelling unit. So these policies would go one step further in potentially allowing up to 2 accessory dwellings or up to 3 dwellings on a property. Next slide, please. So this slide helps illustrate how in this policy context, where at the local municipal level, we must plan according to provincial policy directions. And it's now a provincial requirement that all municipalities need to now allow accessory third dwellings. This was under the province's Housing Supply Action Plan, which included a number of amendments that had the overall purpose to help provide more housing choices and more affordable housing in communities. One of these amendments was through Bill 108, which amended the Ontario Planning Act to include that specific requirement for municipalities to now permit accessory third dwellings. However, within this top-down framework, there is still flexibility for the town's policies in its official plan and zoning bylaw to consider how best to allow third dwellings in the Innisfil context. So although this is something that we need to do, but it is something that is good for us to do, as our official plan has several policies that are already encouraging the creation of accessory dwellings and more affordable housing. Next slide, please. The purpose of our process to date has been to consider how best to allow accessory dwellings in order to maximize their overall community benefit through the increased housing choices that they would provide. In addition to our own background research, which included an assessment of the housing market, which was summarized in the last report that went to council on December 9th, a key part of our consideration was also the online survey that was available on the town's Get Involved website from November 26, 2020 until the end of January 31st. So a total of 398 surveys were submitted, and the questions were focused on key policy and implementation considerations for allowing accessory dwellings in Innisfil, and that's summarized within the report and it's attached to the report as well, all the questions and responses. Next slide, please. From our background research and through the survey comments, it's clear that accessory dwellings can have a real positive community benefit through the many benefits that they can provide. And these include flexible living arrangements, such as accessory dwellings, provide a separate arrangement for youth or an elderly family member who for health, safety, or economic reasons may no longer be able to live on their own. And especially during the pandemic, we've heard that family members want to live closer together. And we've especially heard that many would rather have their elderly family member living in an accessory dwelling on their own property, as opposed to being in a retirement home or a long-term care facility at this time as well. They provide affordable housing as house prices and rents have continued to increase astronomically in Innisfil and the surrounding area. For example, last month, the average house price in Innisfil had increased to $875,000. This was a 10% increase just from the month prior. There was a 30% increase from October of 2020, when the average house price was $687,000, and a 53% increase from July of 2020, when the average house price in Innisfil was $572,000. So through our survey comments, this has really been referred to as a housing crisis, and many of the survey respondents really outline their concerns to us. And we've heard from several realtors as well over the past few months as well. Accessory units, they provide more rental housing, and there's a real strong demand for this throughout Innisfil, as evident by our low rental vacancy rate in the area and increasing rent prices. There's also economic benefits to homeowners. They can assist with mortgage payments that can allow an individual to purchase the house. But at the same time, the rental income can allow individuals such as seniors with fixed incomes, or even those recently unemployed, to remain housed as well. When constructed legally, they can provide increased safety for tenants, as they're built to meet health and safety standards of building, electrical, fire codes. And they also make better use of existing infrastructure, such as optimizing their use of land, housing stock, infrastructure. This is because in most cases, accessory dwellings are occupied by smaller household sizes. And overall, all of these points really underline how it's in these uncertain times amidst the pandemic and our recovery that it's critical that we look to support the community's social and economic security and resilience, as stated in the community needs assessment that was recently undertaken by the town as well. And one way we can do this is providing flexibility through policies that would encourage the creation of accessory second and third dwellings and more housing choices. Next slide, please. Here are the few comments from the survey that really help highlight this need for more housing options in Innisfil, as well as to highlight the community benefits. For that first comment, talking about the need for more housing to help students, young couples, seniors. The second comment, speaking about the home prices skyrocketing, not getting cheaper. Not everyone can afford to buy a house in Innisfil. And the last comment also really highlighting the need for 3 separate living spaces on a property in this specific circumstance, where the daughter and fiance, they live in a basement apartment, now expecting a baby. A third dwelling would allow me a separate space, the respondent. My son would reside in the apartment, and my daughter would have the main floor, creating affordable living for us all. Next slide, please. However, it's also important to touch on some of the concerns that survey respondents expressed regarding accessory dwellings. And some of the most common concerns expressed were that accessory dwellings would have negative impacts on parking and street congestion. There's a perception that more renter households would result in increased noise, crime, reduced privacy within neighborhoods, that properties with accessory dwellings would be poorly maintained, that property values in a neighborhood would decrease, and that neighborhoods would become overcrowded. And this could negatively impact servicing infrastructure. So these concerns led us to assess the reality of how our existing accessory second dwelling units have been integrated within our neighborhoods, which since 2014, of the 78 that have been registered, only 6% of them, so 5 second dwelling units, they've had any bylaw infractions thus far. So this suggests that the negative perceptions of accessory dwellings are not aligning with this reality where the 94% of our existing registered second units have not had any bylaw infractions. And a further point to help alleviate these concerns is that when our survey asked the purpose for why respondents would build an accessory dwelling, and 80% of respondents indicated that they would do so for family accommodation. So this suggests that the majority of accessory dwellings may not actually be for rental accommodation, but to house extended family, meaning that many of the concerns expressed through the survey of property maintenance arising from renter households and absentee landlords may also not occur. So this is why I'm considering, on balance, the community benefits and concerns that were expressed through the survey. Although a lot of these concerns were carefully considered and taken into account when drafting the amendments, the draft generally aims to be more permissive in allowing accessory dwellings within Innisfil, really in order to help maximize the community benefits that they can provide and were outlined a couple slides ago. Now, the next few slides, I'll provide an overview of some of the main draft zoning provisions for how it's proposed that accessory second and third dwellings would potentially be allowed in Innisfil. I won't go into the details of the rationale for each one, but that is outlined further in the staff report. Next slide, please. So overall, up to 2 accessory dwellings would now be permitted per lot as an accessory use to a single detached, semi-detached, or street townhouse dwelling. And the accessory dwelling could be within the main house or in an attached or detached accessory structure. I'll have a slide to show the potential configurations later on. And in terms of maximum size, it would need to be smaller than the principal unit when within the existing structure. But when in a detached structure, they could be only up to half the size of the principal dwelling, up to a maximum of 100 square meters, so roughly just over 1,000 square feet. But to have a building footprint of no more than 55 square meters, so about 600 square feet. And each accessory dwelling could only have a maximum of 3 bedrooms. Next slide, please. These are the general areas in Innisfil where accessory second units, they've already been restricted. So it's proposed that these same restrictions would be maintained through this update as well. And these include not permitting them on hazard lands as determined by the applicable conservation authority. They wouldn't be permitted on private servicing within 100 meters of Lake Simcoe. That's to comply with the Lake Simcoe protection plan. They wouldn't be permitted in Cookstown until sufficient servicing is available because of the constraints that are within the village of Cookstown. And they also wouldn't be permitted on a lot with a group home. Next slide, please. So in terms of parking requirements, it's proposed that at least 1 parking space would be required for each dwelling unit that's created on a property. So a property with 2 accessory dwellings would be required to have a total of 3 spaces. Tandem parking would be permitted, and the existing parking dimension would stay the same as currently in our zoning bylaw for accessory second units. But to prevent front lawns from being paved over, a minimum of 40% of front yard must also remain as landscaped open space. So the image on the right helps illustrate how narrower properties, such as the one furthest to the right, would only be permitted 1 accessory dwelling, as they would only be able to provide 2 parking spaces on the lot. The 2 other properties, they could accommodate up to 2 accessory units, as they would be able to provide the 4 parking spaces on their lot. So this is a way to help alleviate some of the concerns about smaller, narrower properties being able to potentially have up to the 3 dwelling units as well. Next slide, please. So in terms of potential configurations for accessory dwellings, the proposed amendments, under the proposed amendments, all of these forms could potentially be allowed, subject to meeting all the other zoning provisions as well. So, but in the last example, which was the least popular in the survey, that would only be allowed on properties larger than 1,000 square meters in size, so about 1/4 of an acre. And to quickly run through these in order of most popular to least popular based on the survey responses, top left, the second dwelling could be within the main house, and the third dwelling could be in a detached structure. In the next example, the second dwelling could be within the main house, and the third dwelling could be in an attached structure. All 3 units could be within the same structure in the bottom left example. And in the last more restrictive example, both accessory dwellings can be in detached structures, but of course that's only on the larger properties. I should also point out that our survey asked if we should be considering a tiny home, typically constructed on a trailer bed as an accessory dwelling. And this was actually the most popular example of all these configurations because of their potential affordability. And this type of dwelling would be permitted under these same draft policies that I've been summarizing, but they still must be constructed in such a way that they'd be classified as a building to meet the standards of the Ontario Building Code. So it would be also subject to foundation and anchorage requirements of the building code as well. Next slide, please. Now, I mentioned that detached accessory dwellings, they're proposed to have more restrictions. So I'll quickly summarize these now and provide a couple examples on the next 2 slides. The maximum height can be up to that of the principal dwelling, or 7 meters, whichever is less. And as I already indicated, properties greater than 1,000 square meters in size, as outlined or highlighted in blue on the image, they can only have up to 2 detached accessory dwellings, and properties smaller than this can only have 1. The maximum size can be up to 50% of the principal dwelling, up to a maximum of 100 square meters or a 55 square meter building footprint. They must be set back a minimum of 1.2 meters from property lines. And they also cannot be more than 50% of the backyard, with a minimum of at least 25% of that backyard being maintained as landscaped open space. Next slide, please. Now, this is an example of a property larger than 1,000 square meters and how it could potentially be large enough to have 2 detached accessory dwellings. Next slide, please. And the next example is just of a property that's smaller than that size and how it would only be able to be large enough to potentially accommodate 1 detached accessory dwelling. But if it had 2 accessory dwellings, one could only be detached and the other could either be within or attached to the principal structure, provided that it can meet the other zoning restrictions such as parking and also these the backyard would also need to be big enough. So in this example, the backyard is big enough because the property has a longer backyard, but on the smaller backyards, you would need to be able to meet the minimum. You'd have to stay within that 50% of the backyard. Also, that you'd have to meet the minimum size for a dwelling under the Ontario Building Code, and you'd also have to then meet the minimum landscaped open space requirement as well. Next slide, please. So the report also includes draft amendments to our registration bylaw that has been in place to keep a registry of our accessory second dwelling units. And this has been a helpful way to provide a public list that's been available on our website and to communicate with external agencies such as Canada Post, County of Simcoe when it comes to delivery of services such as mail and waste collection. And the draft is recommending that the registration bylaw be maintained for both accessory second and third dwellings. However, the changes are proposed to simplify and automate this registration process as an incentive to encourage the legalization of more accessory dwellings. And among these changes, there wouldn't be a registration fee. The registration would only be one time. and it wouldn't need to be renewed at the 3 or 5 year intervals as under the current process where the properties not owned or not properties where the property owner did not live there, they would have to required to register every 3 years. If the property owner did live there, it was 5 years currently. But to alleviate some of the administrative challenges that building department's already facing, it's proposed that it would only be renewed if deemed to be in non-compliance with the applicable standards, and at which point a fine would also be issued for non-compliance. Next slide, please. Now, the final recommendation report that comes back to council, it will include considerations for an implementation strategy. And this will address any additional incentives that could be offered or maybe currently available through existing federal, provincial, or county funding programs, such as the county's secondary suites grant program. And there would also be considerations for updating our how-to guide with design considerations, as well as any opportunities for other community education upon adoption of the final policies. It will also provide considerations for a monitoring framework where staff could report back to council at regular intervals, such as 1 or every 2 years, to assess the effect of the policies and any changes that may be required. And the recommendation report will also provide some discussion on how the policies can form the basis for the development of the town's future affordable housing strategy that's also being considered to be undertaken later this year. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, these policies, they do mark a shift in how our neighborhoods have traditionally developed. But we need to think differently in order to meaningfully address the affordable housing that we are facing. And planning staff feel that an increase in the number of legalized accessory dwellings in Innisfil and the creation of more affordable housing choices can really provide a substantial community benefit that supports the vision of both the town's Our Place official plan, as well as the innovative Innisfil 2030 community strategic plan. And because of this, the draft policies, they aim to provide a flexible made in Innisfil solution for accessory dwellings to maximize their benefits and to support the community's pandemic recovery, while still addressing concerns for how they're accommodated within the town. So the next steps after tonight's public meeting will be to come back to council with final policies, hopefully by the end of the spring, May or June. And with that, I do look forward to any comments and questions, and thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pentikainen. Questions or comments from council, please. Councillor Van Berkel.
Thank you, Your Worship. Would the zoning bylaw for lot coverage still be in effect, or would each one be, like, I know that some of these subdivisions have a very small yard, or would each one be assessed individually and have to go to the Committee of Adjustment, or would it just be the same as it is now?
Through your worship to Councillor Van Berkel, it is proposing the draft amendments that if in a situation where an accessory dwelling unit is being constructed, that it would be exempt from the lot coverage as currently specified in our zoning bylaw. So the way it's worded is that you could be, despite what the lot coverage right now is saying, you could be up to 50% of your backyard meeting the setbacks, and you would still need to maintain at least 25% of your backyard as landscape open space. So it is proposing an exemption, recognizing that there are homes already that are that likely wouldn't have the opportunity based on existing lot coverage to provide an accessory dwelling unit.
Just follow up, Your Worship. So there would be no Committee of Adjustment involved. You apply for this, and if your house is, I don't know, 3,000 square feet, you can build 1,500 square feet, basically. Is that what you're saying? As long as you can maintain.
Yeah, through your worship to the councillor, there would only be a Committee of Adjustment if you wouldn't meet what the draft amendment is specifying. So yeah, we'd have to go through that detail and a bit more, look into that a bit further. But it it is intending to provide more flexibility for detached structures.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, I have Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Mayor Dolan. Thank you, Councillor Van Berkel, because that was one of the questions I did want to ask, and so thank you for clarifying that for me. I do have a question around if we're going to allow for greater lot coverage. One of the reasons we have that stipulated is for impervious surfaces on property in terms of drainage. So is there anything here that is going to request a drainage review in terms of how that water is handled? Because I think you're going to have more impacts, especially with the conditions that we have in Innisfil, around how we manage that water on there.
Through your worship to Councillor Waters, yes, there is a requirement for a lot grading plan. Yeah, if our CBO was on the call, maybe he may correct me, but I believe it is, I can't remember the exact threshold, but it would be required a lot grading plan, I believe in most scenarios.
Okay, thank you. Just a second question. Is it, correct me if I'm wrong, and the chief building inspector might, official might help me out here. When people apply for second units or third units, I thought there were minimum sizes for bedrooms and those types of things. If you're going to allow tiny homes, how does that work?
Penny?
Yes, yeah, I can yeah, attempt to begin with this, and then yeah, if our CBO corrects me on anything that I say wrong, but yeah, there is a minimum size under the Ontario Building Code, which yeah, I believe I did specify within the report. So as long as that minimum size is met, then yeah, the building permit application would also then have to meet that minimum size for the dwelling, as well as then minimums when it comes to all other aspects as well, in terms of yeah, bedrooms, if it does include a bedroom, yeah, ceiling heights as well. So each application does need to meet building code, but there is flexibilities to meet Ontario Building Code as well when it comes to smaller structures as well.
Mr. Vickers, did you have something to add?
Through your worship, Paul's doing great. He's right, though. It's all spelled out in the building code, and that's our minimum standard. But generally, we build to quite a bit higher than minimum standards, particularly in the sizes of spaces that we occupy. So I think there will be room and flexibility to build smaller structures as residents, as per what Paul's been looking at.
Thank you, Mr. Vickers. More questions, Councillor Waters?
Just one comment I'll make is that I agree that this is going to help out affordable residents. But my question is, this is kind of a double-edged sword, because I can see now that that if we allow this to go through, that property values, I think, are going to skyrocket, because people will be able to realize that they can get more money from their property, especially with the bigger lots, that they can put 2 extra structures on there, bring some extra revenue in. And so they're going to be in their sales pitch, they're going to be saying this can be divided up into, and that's why we want more money. So it's going to drive the opportunity for housing out of the reach of even those people who are searching now. So it was just a single comment, but I certainly see the need for doing what we're doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Waters. Councillor Asadi.
Thank you, Your Worship. To Mr. Pentikainen, I wonder if you can help clarify for our residents who are watching who have not had an opportunity to read the report or understand Bill 108. Does the town of Innisfil have an option to not allow third dwelling units in our town?
Through your worship to Councillor Asadi, it is a requirement under the Ontario Planning Act that all municipalities do need to allow accessory third dwelling units. However, some municipalities that have have passed these policies, they have intended to purposely be more restrictive, such as not allowing them on properties of a certain size. And that's entirely a path that the town could take as well. But from a professional planning opinion, where we do see the substantial community benefits from providing more housing options and choices, that's why the staff recommended draft is intended to be more permissive.
Okay, thank you. And if I could follow up with my additional questions. Thank you, Your Worship. So really it's about finding the best solutions, because I think we can all agree that there needs to be options for affordable housing, whether it's bachelors, 1 bedroom, 2 or 3, for people, especially young people and seniors that can't find affordable housing. Just clarification, there is no change to our shore policy, so this would exclude any second dwelling, third dwelling units going on top of boathouse apartments, as one question. Just clarification on that. And then also, how does properties with septic beds, how are they impacted with this? Because I see that there would be a problem. Are they excluded from having second and third dwelling units unless it was in their house and accommodate a larger septic system?
Mr. Vickers?
Your Worship, I could answer the first
Sure.
question, and then I'll have Mr. Vickers respond to the second. In terms of our shore and any impacts there, so second dwelling units, they haven't been permitted within 100 meters of the shoreline currently. The our shore bylaw, it doesn't allow apartments within boathouses either. So the draft amendments are also saying there would not be any accessory third dwelling units along the shoreline either. So that's the first question that you answered, and I'll now ask Barry to respond to the second.
Through Your Worship, Councillor Arsadi, yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is, as part of the permitting process, we'd be asking the proponent of the proposal to do an assessment of how big their septic system is and demonstrate that it complied with the code. So they may not have to do anything. Maybe their septic system is sufficiently sized to accommodate the additional structure. And if it's not, then they would have to increase its size and make whatever adjustments were required.
And then just final one, and then I'll let other councillors. And some properties, in my ward and others, they have a very large garage structure in their backyard. That structure would be taken into consideration in size to fit any second or third dwelling units separate on the property as well. Is what that's my understanding. Would that be considered?
Yeah, through you. Yes, that's correct. Yeah, there is, as long as it stays within the maximum height restriction that we currently have of 7 meters, which should give some flexibility when it comes to that. But yeah, they would have to stay within that. What's proposed to be no more than half the main dwelling size up to that 55 square meter building footprint, and meeting the minimum setbacks as well.
Thank you, Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Your Worship. As much as I like the idea on the surface, there's some things that just set off alarms with me. Right, Canadian Mortgage Housing Corporation says that 10 to 25% of houses in most regions have unregistered units. Now, you're saying there's 78 currently that are registered with the town. So let's just say you break it down from the lowest end of 1,300 for the town of Innisfil. And let's even break it down even further, that half of those that are unregistered are for seniors, like, mothers, mother-in-laws, or kids, like, parents helping children with a new family while they're in university, a place to live. That's still 12%. That's one, that's 1 out of every 8 that's registered, and that creates a whole underground market that the town has no oversight over. It has no way of holding them to account. It's telling them that, hey, we can make it easier to register is a nice idea, but if they're not going to do it and they don't want to, they're not, the potential for harm is incredible. Then if you add in the fact of the parking, on one of the slides you stated that there was two parking spaces. Well, if they have a third car, and my first thought in the middle of winter is snowplows. What are we going to do? And then, you know, bylaw gets involved every time there's tickets or there's a blitz, or, you know, the potential for this just doesn't sit right with me. And it's not a solid yes or no. When you showed us the pie chart, you said that very positive was 30.9% and very negative was 30.9%. And then the positive was 47 versus the negative of 45. So people are still very divided over this. Like I said, on the surface, it looks nice. You're getting the idea that, hey, we're making it more accessible, we're making it more legitimate. But when you get down below that, there's the potential for a lot of harm for the neighborhoods. And it doesn't sit right with me. And secondly, if I may, the property standards bylaw on page 12, are we referring to the Clean Communities bylaw that is in effect, or is the actual property standards themselves, are we talking a separate bylaw when it comes to upkeeping the properties?
Through you, yeah, just to answer that last comment, yes, it's referring to our property standards bylaw, which is named as the one that you. So yeah, there's no separate bylaw other than the one that speaks to the maintenance of the properties and ensuring they're up to standard.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Fowler. Councillor Nicol.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think that Councillor Waters, Orsatti, and Fowler have touched on a few of my points already. I understand we're just receiving this, so I don't need a response tonight. I know this is a provincial direction to assist in providing further affordable options for accommodations, but I wonder how appropriate it is locally in some of our areas that are not serviced by municipal water and wastewater. Would there not be an impact to our servicing capacity that's already allocated to future development? As identified, survey responses seemed high, with almost 400 surveys completed, but they show a real split between positive and negative responses, with like 48 to 45%, and with 48% who would not opt into this option. As for the parking numbers that were identified, 50% of those surveyed suggested more parking rather than less. So rather than having 3 for 3 units, that 4 to 5 would be more appropriate. I understand restricting the septic, restricting units that are within 100 meters of the lake because of septic. I don't know why we wouldn't restrict all unserviced units, because most tanks are 1,000 gallons, and to have 3 families utilizing that versus 1 is definitely a detriment as far as I'm concerned. Again, this is generating a lot of interest on the third units, which are proposed to be on lots over 1,000 square meters, which is essentially 100 feet by 107 feet, or a quarter acre as it was identified. I wonder why there wouldn't be or shouldn't be some restrictions on any secondary units based on lot sizes, especially since new builds are now offering somewhere around 35 to 38 foot lots with essentially a 20 by 20 foot backyard. I just wonder if the limited parking would deny these an opportunity, or whether just the size should be considered. I do have a question about primary residences plus 2 detached units and any impact there may be on, say, medical, police, or emergency response, and any confusion that could be over addresses, especially where you're allowing these on properties that could be semi-detached or towns or row houses with access to a backyard. And then it was identified too that the influx of non-residential owners looking to buy income properties, as the market is so crazy right now, and just concerned about 3-family properties with very limited ownership interaction. So just my points. Again, I don't need answers on any of these tonight, just things that come out to me. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nicol. Deputy Mayor Davidson.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions here, and I don't, like Councillor Nichols, I don't need the answers tonight. But what I see here is what I see happening is a possible increase in the revenue stream for the municipality. Would the town be having or impact increase the tax payable to the municipality because of the value of the property going up with 2 additional units, bringing in income? Also, too, if people are on sewer and water, would additional costs be applied to these additional units to cover water and wastewater? Because I see there is an increase to the municipality as well as income. Also, one of the questions put by a constituent tonight, would rent controls be in effect? Because people are going to try and maximize their revenue from these additional units. So if we're really going to help affordable housing, we really should say, okay, then this is the maximum rent that can be charged to make it affordable to those people individually. And my last and not least is what happens if you build a couple of these and they start Airbnb-ing them? We're seeing that problem now. What's to stop them from saying, hey, they're Airbnb now? So those questions I'd like staff to think about. In our next meeting, we can maybe deal with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Ices.
Thank you, Worship. I wanted to recognize that there is definitely a housing problem in Innisfil, but I am also concerned about the unintended consequences, whether it be parking or some of the servicing issues that could come out of that. So all the other councillors have brought up some of those questions. So I look forward to the staff report after this public meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Ices. Mr. Pentikainen, when you talk about you need 2 parking spots for 1 second dwelling, is one of those parking spots the garage?
Yes, Your Worship. Currently, our zoning bylaw, it does count a space within the garage as a parking space. So yeah.
Because I see that as a bit of a problem, because I think that most people don't use their garage as a storage shed as opposed to a parking spot. The other question I had was in regards to the change of the registration. If I remember correctly, back when we were deciding on whether what rules were going to be around second dwellings, one of the things we were worried about was absentee landowners. It's one thing to have like the example there where you've got the kids and the mother and the grandmother kind of all in one property. It's another thing when it's somebody who buys a lot and then rents out 3 spaces. And it talked about the very limited number of bylaw infractions that were that have been realized with the current second dwellings. And I just wondered if we knew the percentage of those that were absentee landowners versus people who lived and had a second dwelling, like a granny flat of some sort. And again, I don't need this tonight, but I'd just be very curious as to how many of those current second dwellings, what the percentage was. I think one of the things to keep in mind is the fact that people all over Innisfil, except for Cookstown, have been allowed to do this since 2014, and we only have 70. So it's not like, you know, we're going to have streets turned into all with 3 dwellings. And I'm keen on the tiny homes only because you know, it received the most input and that was the most favorable, and why they would not be allowed without a proper foundation. The idea being, for instance, we saw in the pandemic, if there was a healthcare worker in the home, they were staying in a trailer in the driveway so that they could self-isolate from the rest of the family while during the pandemic. But of course, after the pandemic, that will no longer be required. And one question I would like you to address, if you could, is where are our neighbors in this process? Everybody's going to have to go through this process, and I'm just curious where people around us are landing, and if you know, what recommendations they're putting before their councils.
Yes, Your Worship. Yeah, as part of our background research, we did assess other municipalities, the ones that have gone through the process. And in the report coming back to council, we can include a summary of that. Like Barrie, they do have zoning provisions in place, for detached accessory dwelling units. The others, our other neighbors, they haven't gone through the process yet. But yeah, in the report coming back to council, it can include that summary.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pentkin, and very, very informative. Any other questions from council before we go to the public? Councillor Orsatti.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want, in the document in page 7, it talks about 78 registered accessory dwelling units in the town currently, but it says that only represents 2 to 6% of the total number of accessory dwellings that actually exist. So 2%, all the rest have second dwelling units they've never registered. So if this happens with third dwelling units on septic bed properties and all the rest, I feel that it's a concern. I wanted to ask about the statement of fines for non-compliance. Is that non-compliance to register your property? Because that would certainly help people to make sure that they're registered if they want to do a third dwelling unit. And just as a final statement from myself, as the same with other councillors, because I have a very intensified ward in Ward 3, I have a real issue with a real concern with parking and third dwelling units being in townhouses, second dwelling units in them, they can accommodate, but third dwelling and parking, I don't see how it can even handle. And I also have a problem being a septic owner and with third dwelling units on septic bed properties, unless it was a farm and they were installing a separate septic bed. And there certainly needs to be, you know, a careful bylaw inspections and that because of concerns with fires in illegal ones that aren't registered. Those are my final comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Waters.
Just a point of clarification. When it was mentioned that if you're going to have a secondary detached unit, it cannot be any larger than 50% of the primary building. My question is, if you have 2 detached dwellings on the property, is it 50% for both of them or 50% each? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Through Your Worship to Councillor Waters. I believe the intent was it could be, each one could be up to half the size. But that's something that we can clarify, within the zoning provisions or with the final recommendation.
Thank you.
Mayor Dolan?
Yes.
Okay.
Councillor Payne, go ahead.
Thank you. Good questions, everybody. And some of the questions that I have already been answered. I'm not going to go there. I just have one question. Will there be different rules for family members, say an aging parent or both parents, as opposed to strangers that you don't know? Would there be different rules there for accommodating the families?
Mr. Pentikainen?
Through Your Worship to Councillor Payne, that's something through zoning. We can't zone for people. We can only zone for the use, and the same building code applies to the structure. So there can't be different zoning provisions or building code provisions based on who lives at the property, because who lives at the property can change as people move. Okay,
so if a family member then lives in a bedroom with the members of their family, there's no difference, like there's no change at all. It's just like they're living in their residence, so it doesn't make any difference.
Yes. So if it's just a bedroom within a house, that's within the house. That's not a separate accessory dwelling because it doesn't have its separate kitchen or sleep. It's not its own separate unit. So in that case, yeah, it wouldn't be classified under these zoning provisions.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Payne. So back when second dwellings were first allowed, the County of Simcoe came out with grants where people could apply to the grants to have their second dwelling official and registered. And the intent of that was to get people with illegal secondary dwellings to get them on board and make sure that they were properly equipped as far as fire safety and is concerned and so on. But obviously it wasn't as successful as we hoped if we think that it's only 2 to 6%. But I would ask Mr. Pentikainen how we came about that number. Like, how do we know what we don't know?
Yeah, great question, Your Worship. That really is just an estimate. It's based off of that range that CMHC gives of that 10 to 25%. Like Innisfil, we're likely at the low end of that range, likely even less than that 10%. Like on our survey, when we asked respondents if they already had an existing second dwelling unit, it was like 8 or 9% that said they did. So that gives a sense of it could be around 10%. And also just to address, so these policies, there is an issue with the unregistered illegal second dwelling units currently. And from our experience, there have been some restrictions, especially with the renewal. And these policies, they shouldn't make that worse, and they should really make it better. And that's the intent, to try to encourage the legalization of both the existing second dwelling units as well as any potential third dwelling units. But a third dwelling unit issue shouldn't be made any worse by this either, because in most cases, it's a lot it's a lot easier to hide a detached third unit in someone's backyard where it's clear that people are living there. So, and it's easier to hide people if it's a basement apartment that's done illegally too. So, yeah, I think the concerns about third units being on all properties or on most properties because of these, it's a lot harder for that to be invisible.
Thank you, Mr. Pentikainen. Very helpful. Councillor Van Berkel.
Thank you, Your Worship. That's why I asked about Committee of Adjustment, because I like the way that works. You know, it goes to the Committee of Adjustment, and the neighbors are warned. There's I don't know, there's a certain within 100 yards of each house, the neighbors are advised. And, you know, all the drainage plants and everything have to be done when it comes to the Committee of Adjustment, as well as, you know, letters from the different departments saying, yeah, there's an objection or no objection, and everybody knows. So there is no argument later on if it's approved or not approved, because they've been able to see it all, and they've been given a chance to come to a meeting and object to whatever, or in favor, whatever they want. And I was just wondering if we could put some kind of a process like that in place for these units, you know, because maybe somebody's going to say, well, you know, apply for a garage, and they're going to illegally turn it into like an extra garage and illegally turn it into another unit. So, you know, I like the idea of being open, where like the Committee of Adjustment, where, you know, neighbors know and everybody knows up front what's going to happen there. And I think it causes a lot less arguments between neighbors. And I was just wondering if we could, you know, we could impose a policy, something like that.
Yes, that's something that in the report that comes back to council with the final recommendations, we can definitely consider an approach potentially. But in terms of, just to caution that a little bit, because from our experience to date with the second units is that even a renewal of the registration every 3 or 5 years, like that was a deterrent enough for property owners to comply forward. So any additional restrictions that are put in place, it means that we'll have likely fewer comply with the process, and we likely will have fewer legalized units as opposed to potentially more illegal units. So that's something we can definitely address further in the report that comes back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council. Last chance before I go to the public.
Can I just ask one more question?
Sure, go ahead, Councillor Payne.
And it's probably in the notes, but it's gone out of my head right now. I was just, what is the maximum number of people that you can rent in one of these units?
Through your worship to Councillor Payne, we're unable to, that's something that zoning wouldn't be able to address in terms of specifying a number of units that could be rented or not. Yeah, it's just something that, yeah, similar to the response to your previous question, is that we can't zone for people, and we can't specify the use in terms of whether it's yeah, who lives there, whether the property owner needs to live there or not. That's something too that the Planning Act was amended, so we can't require an owner to live at the property. So yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. Go ahead, Councillor Payne.
So you're still working on that? Is that what you're saying, or?
Sorry if I wasn't clear enough. No, like we can't specify if the number of units that can or cannot be rented if 3 units are created on the property.
Okay, I'm not asking about the number of units. What I'm asking is how many people can be in one unit at a time.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I didn't understand the question. Yeah, and that's something too, we can't specify a maximum occupancy. We can only specify the number of bedrooms, which right now has been a maximum of 3 bedrooms per second dwelling unit, and we're proposing that it's a maximum of 3 bedrooms for a second or a third unit as well. So that's the only way we can restrict occupancy.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Vickers has something to add to that.
So just to follow up on Mr. Pentakane's answer, in there being 3 bedrooms, the building code's occupancy level that gets attributed to each bedroom is 2. So if you have a bedroom, the building code is under the understanding that there's 2 people maximum. So if we had 3 bedrooms, if we permitted 3 bedrooms, the maximum occupant load we would be expecting would be 6, and correspondingly, we'd be reviewing the septic systems for that additional load.
Thank you, Mr. Vickers. That's helpful. Thank you. Councillor Sadi.
Sorry, thank you, Your Worship. One thing I thought of while we're talking about all this is, and I think it was in the report, that some of the bylaw infractions or complaints were animals control. I'd like to make sure that or a recommendation that if the town is allowing 3 units on a property, that there's still only a maximum of 2 dogs per that property, not 2 dogs per unit. Otherwise, we could have 6 dogs in a small yard property, and we've got a nightmare. And each councillor is smiling and bylaw, I don't think we'd have to hire more bylaw officers. So I'd certainly like to see that 2 dogs maximum for the property, regardless of the number of the units, is hopefully in that report.
Through your worship to Councillor Rosati, just to address that quickly now, yes, that's specified in the animal control bylaw, and these amendments, they're not proposing any changes. So it would still be the two dogs per property.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Good discussion. Now we'll hear from those members of the public who have questions regarding the proposed amendment before council votes on receiving the report and all comments provided during this meeting. And the speaking order is now on your screen, and seeing we only have one member of the public, I'm going to skip the rest of the preamble that talks about, you know, you have to stop after 5 minutes and let everybody have a turn and then come back again, because we only have one person who's with us tonight, and that is Gail Lewis. So whenever you're ready, Gail, if you want to turn on your video and your audio and give us your comments and ask any questions you might have. Welcome to our meeting.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so you're ready for me to go ahead?
Yes, we sure are.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and council members. My name is Gail Lynn Lewis. I've resided in Innisfil for almost 10 years now, and my education is in behavioral science. For years, I ran group homes for troubled youth throughout Ontario and Alberta. Additionally, my son and I recently co-founded a charity called Compassion Culture Canada, which strives to take several action steps via food, clothing, and housing security programs for our most vulnerable families within our community. So obviously, I'm very interested in affordable housing issues. Saying that, I have requested to be part of this meeting in hopes to advocate and to give very strong support towards your proposed zoning bylaw amendments that would allow these accessory third dwelling units within our community. I would like to start by saying that, in my opinion, allowing these dwellings on properties with principal residents on site will, of course, be greatly beneficial to our community in the following ways. One, it would allow, and I think I'm going to say some of what you guys said, so that's kind of quirky, but one, having a separate dwelling could allow for aging family members to live close to their family with supports and independence, rather than moving to a more expensive housing option like a senior's residence. Two, today's young adults face unprecedented housing costs, along with less jobs due to COVID. So having a separate dwelling on their family's property may allow this population to rent cheaply from their family, as well as live independently while saving money for their futures. Three, since COVID has hit, many more people are working from home, and this trend is likely to continue well into the future. As we know, working from home can have many distractions, so having a permittable dwelling on a property may allow people to have a private work environment while continuing to earn their much needed income. Four, again, since COVID has hit, many people and families are struggling to maintain the cost of their homes due to loss of employment or decreased employment hours. By having dwellings on their property, a homeowner will have the economic benefit and financial stability that would come from being able to rent the dwelling out. I also must stop and point out that just myself, my own opinions, think that most tenants who rent on site from their landlords are pretty respectful normally, so there would be less likely to be disruptive to neighbors. This brings me to 5.5, which is the most important point thus far. The fact remains that our community, like many others, have a severe and chronic shortage of affordable rental units, which is having a direct, adverse, and harmful effect on many of our community members. The reality is that our council and our community members need to recognize that we must move forward and allow approval for these dwellings. Moving forward with the necessary zoning bylaw amendments that would allow third dwellings units is by far the fastest, most effective, and economically fiscal method to provide the necessary number of affordable housing units that are required by persons who desperately need it within our community currently and in the future. Now, I'd like to say, if anyone thinks we do not have a significant population of persons that require affordable housing alternatives, I am here to share with you some cold, hard truths. About a month ago, I posted on a couple of local chat sites. My post simply asked for anyone who lives in Innisfil who is experiencing living in financially vulnerable situations to feel free to share their situation and/or suggestions of what could better assist them to become more financially stable while living amongst our community. Within a few hours, I literally had to shut down the post as there were so many personal messages to respond to. Since then, I've received over 100 emails explaining various stories of hardships and struggles from current and past community members, which I could share at a later point with permission from the people. However, I will share the main themes that transpired from reading these emails with you now. First, a high ratio of emails were from single parents. some working, some on assistance. But there was a consistent theme that after paying housing costs, there was next to nothing left to pay for food or clothing for their children. Also, it was noted that many single parents noted they ended up having to actually negotiate renting a room or 2 rooms from a house because that was all they could afford locally. This often led to a vicarious living situations, lack of privacy for children, and often conflict situations with their roommates. Second, about 20% of the emails were sent on behalf of family members or friends of someone struggling who was either too embarrassed to share or had no access to internet, phone, or computer. And again, housing costs was the highest noted issue amongst these emails as well. Third, about 10% of the emails explained how important keeping a roof over their head was, but in order to do so, it often meant not paying a bill like heat or hydro. It was noted in several emails that I received that Children's Aid would often become involved to ensure that children's necessities of life were being met. Lastly, a high number of emails indicated that as their finances have dwindled during COVID, many families noted that they had unfortunately had to uproot their children from their schools and friends to move to another area that they could find a little bit more affordable housing than we have currently. So in summary, the numerous emails shared story after story of pain, suffering, and anguish on many levels. Many were very hard to read and go through. In conclusion, I will once again implore both the members of the council and the community to support the steps needed to allow third dwelling units within our town. By doing so, we are not only meeting the expectations laid out over the last couple of years by both our provincial and federal governments through the things like the More Homes, More Choices initiative and the rapid housing initiatives. But more importantly, we as a community will be proud that we are taking the steps to ensure that we are upholding the Human Rights Commission most recent position and statements in 2019, which states in section 3.2 in quotes that housing is a human right and that the problem in rental housing and access to affordable rental housing is a systematic human rights violations and a prevalent lack of awareness that can and must be addressed without further delay. With this, I will end and trust the right steps are taken moving forward. I thank you for your time and attention to this matter. I wish brighter futures for all of us in our community. Namaste.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lewis. That was for your passion and for all of the information that you shared with us this evening. We very much appreciate you being here, and we very much appreciate you being so patient while we went through all of our questions. So thank you for that. Sometimes I think we should let the poor public go first before we get going so they don't have to hang on and wait so long. But
no, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. I will now ask the Deputy Clerk, has there been any emails or phone calls during this meeting that people have phoned in or asked for more information or have comments about? Ms. Thomas.
Thank you, Your Worship. No, no one has made any inquiries this evening.
Okay, well, thank you then. Thank you to everyone who has taken the time to watch this live stream and meeting and presentation regarding the proposed amendment. And we will now go to the recommendation. I would ask for a mover and a seconder, and then council if they have any further comments or questions. So it's moved by Councillor Waters and seconded by Councillor Van Berkel. So this will come back to us, and anybody have any final comments or questions before we call the vote? Seeing none, all those in favor?
In favor.
Thank you, Councillor Payne. None opposed, that is carried. So finally, we'll go then to the confirming bylaw. And a mover and a seconder for the confirming bylaw, Councillor Orsatti, Councillor Ices, all those in favor. That is carried. And adjournment. Councillor Nicol and Councillor Fowler, all those in favor.
In favor.
Thank you. That is carried. I want to thank everybody who is watching tonight. Thank you, Council, for coming to the special meeting, and thanks staff for all the hard work you put into this report. Have a nice evening, everyone, and happy St. Patrick's Day, or what's left of it.